Ooga fucking Ooga cunts, it's Schmeckle. I'm here today with Wrath of Controversy, Angel Gray, and Saiyomi, and we're going to talk about non-binary pronouns. Now, Angel Gray here is non-binary. Saiyomi is a trans lady, and from what I understand, Wrath is a gay man, so we should have a nice spread here.
Stop it! I'm not actually gay. I'm just a douche, and I like to make fun of everyone. And that gays are an easy target because they're the easiest voice to do an impersonation of.
So, Angel, we hadn't really planned to have Saiyomi on, but I thought last night, at the last minute, that it might be interesting to have a trans lady here for this discussion.
Not the first time that I've had a trans woman on a stream with me about this subject, so I don't see why it would be an issue.
So, as the title says, non-binary refutes non-binary genders. I guess we'll start just getting your basic stance on them.
On gender or non-binary gender?
Let's start with gender.
Depending on how you want to look at it, they're separate.
Vague concept.
All right. Well, it depends on which definition you want to go with. If you go straight from the dictionary itself says that gender is specifically male and female. If we were to go just out of that, then there are only two genders to begin with, and they're pulled from based off biological sex. If you want to look at it from the cultural variations and takes of what the idea of gender has been throughout history, even before the actual terms were, that's when we start going into some more muddy water. And I think that's honestly where most of the controversy over all this is actually stemming from. History versus modern. And a lot of it has to do with culture and other aspects that it boils down into more of the quote-unquote soft sciences as opposed to more of the objective, easy to analyze by constant study sciences that we're used to.
Yeah, it breaks down a lot more into to culture
versus reals.
Pretty accurate. Saiyomi, I guess. What's your take on gender?
On gender, well, of course, there's the definition of male or female, but then there's also gender expression.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge difference between the two.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, I could throw on a dress and a wig and probably do something about the beard and express as a female, but I would still be male. And when I take off that costume, then
it's not necessarily just doing it like that. It's the in-betweens too.
Right.
Like say 100% feminine or 100% masculine.
Right. There's still kind of like the shades of gray.
A little subtle
either.
things. Yeah.
I like people who intentionally dress androgynously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a trend. I don't necessarily see the appeal, but like my issue is when people start making up genders, I guess is kind of where my line is drawn, is where I draw the line with the non-binary thing.
If I may ask, what are you counting as being quote unquote made up genders?
Like bun self, Z and Zer.
Yeah, but you walked yourself into a trap there, Wrath.
All that stuff, like, and also the ones that are based on non social sexual mental disorders like autism, because autism doesn't really directly affect your view of yourself. It affects how you process other people and information around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like autism gender just seems like labeling for labeling's sake.
Completely fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, but it's ridiculous because it's labeling for labeling's sake.
But I find that a lot of the multiple genders and stuff, what I find is all they are is just a combination of feminine and masculinity.
Hey,
Is what it
don't spoil.
actually is.
Don't spoil my way of being able to go ahead and fulfill the headline here.
At least that's how I've seen it.
So I'm guessing, Angel, you feel similarly.
The way, ignore the fact that Raph ended up calling pronouns a gender, as in the case with Z and Zier, although completely understandable considering how obnoxious it's gotten. For the most part, overall, yeah, it's making up a gender for the sake of labeling, which is what most of them do, and this is actually going to end up being how I end up refuting the vast majority of them anyways. But making up the new genders and the attached pronouns and all that, it's all just for the sake of not enough hugs as a kid and wanting to feel special. They see that there's group X, Y, or Z that is unique in this way, whether it's good unique or bad unique, but they're getting attention. And because they ended up growing up in a household where they weren't given enough attention because the family was really well off and didn't see it as being necessary, or not well enough off and not having the time and the ability to go ahead and give the attention to the kid, that's where we're starting to see most of these other genders and all other forms of bullcrap stemming from.
So to kind of simplify that, you're saying these kids are just out for attention that they lacked previously.
It's a lot about attention seeking, yes. At least if I were to go ahead and try and generalize it, I would say you could probably get at least 70% of the non-binaries rounded into that category.
That high a number, eh?
That's from what my experiences have been, yeah. From what I've seen from so many.
Say, obviously, you identify as a. I'm kind of confused about that, considering your stance on the non-binary genders. Could you kind of enlighten us on what you mean when you say non-binary?
Like as far as how you express, like how you identify or express yourself.
Personal expression is, as far as my category is a little bit unique from what most of them identify under. Depending on your view and depending on your stance, and I'm going to actually, this will be one of the first ones that I end up refuting as well as a result. But I fall under the category of agender, which is, if you know anything about the stems and roots and all that for language, means I lack gender, technically. Which means, in a way, you could say that it's not even a gender of its own anyways. And as far as I care, I'm just going to dress how I want, act how I want. It's all a mental state to begin with. And these labels just go ahead and say what you fall under. As far as I care, I don't understand the idea of feeling like you're a man or feeling like you're a woman or feeling like you're something in between or any of this. When I tried to figure out where I fell, that got me really pulled into lots of different things mentally, and that threw me way further off base than just saying, screw all of this. When a few years ago, I fell under the androgynous broad category. Then I kept thinking, kept realizing this still doesn't feel right. Thought maybe, okay. I started considering, well, I don't really end up having the same experiences as most non-binaries either. And maybe it was because I was thinking too much along the lines of still in that more cis mindset of thinking more on biology, so excluding the idea of trans. So I ended up thinking, well, okay, maybe it was because I was ignoring the possibility that maybe I was trans. And for a short period, like a couple months, I thought, okay, maybe I might actually be trans. And I ended up realizing, no, none of this, nowhere along the spectrum is actually fitting for me. The moment I ended up stopped trying to figure out where I felt, where on this spectrum of genders and all that I fell, I realized just pulling myself off of it and not really giving a damn about what the mental state is and just it basically pulled
So,
myself out of the entire gender mindset to begin with.
so basically, instead of finding your way to the end of the Choose Your Own Adventure book, you just closed the book and said, "Fuck it."
Basically, simplest way of saying it would be, instead of playing the game, I decided to go ahead and remove my piece from the board. Instead of playing Monopoly, I decided to play Uno. Or Solitaire, rather.
Which makes a lot of sense, because
And
from what it sounds like,
honestly,
from what it sounds like, no, go ahead.
honestly, I think that's what most normal people do to begin with, but because of the way that our society has focused so much on gender the past 30, 40 years, honestly, in a way, focused so much on gender as an abstract for most of America's history, but specifically lately, I think a lot of people are just going ahead and they're over attaching themselves to male, female, or something else just because of the fact they think that they need to. I don't see the point in it. I don't understand what it's supposed to be to actually feel like a quote unquote man. I don't know what it's supposed to be like to feel like a woman or to feel like some other thing, because I just don't feel any of it.
Okay, well that definitely gives a better outline of what you mean,
Where you
because
stand.
I was entirely confused beforehand.
Yeah, I was kind of
Yeah.
like, my first assumption wasn't good. Sorry, go ahead, Schmeckle, and then I'll say my thought.
I was just asking about the comment in the chat, if she'd respond to it.
Okay, I was actually getting ready to address the comment in the chat while in the chat anyway, so.
Awesome.
Oh, okay. If you want to answer it there, that works as well.
Say whichever you prefer.
Sure.
You're the guest.
Let's see. General Keck-related stuff.
Say it's Philip's third
Not
message.
value judgment. While I would go ahead and end up saying that Philip's got a good point with saying that the entire idea of non-binary can only exist in affluent cultures, I think it also depends on what you're labeling as affluent. I'd say it can only exist in cultures where there's stability, whether it's stability in that there's able to work and get along as is, or if it's a culture as big as the modern American society or modern Western society or modern Europe and all that. The entire idea of a non-binary has existed for enough of a time that I wouldn't say such a broad word as affluent really can qualify, but I can see what you would mean depending on how you're defining it.
See, I would say affluent's the wrong word. I would argue basically decadence, not in the not in the like the modern bourgeoisie sense, but basically to where you have a consistent surplus of time that is not dedicated to survival. That's the context of decadence I'm using for this situation.
So what I said, stable.
Right.
As long as the culture is stable. All right. Hunter-gatherer societies cannot afford non-binary genders. I actually have to disagree with that the hunter-gatherer society part, because depending on how you want to view it, a lot of the cultures for like Native American tribes could still qualify under that, but it'd be more a nitpick. You have cultures like Sumer, which were much more farming related and more of a civilized culture, sure, but when you go ahead and look at smaller cultures like in America before colonialization, and I'm not going under that whole thing, but before that period, there was to a degree the same idea. It just hadn't been, I don't know,
And
refined.
even in Asia too. In
Right,
China with
and
the eunuchs.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, overall, Philip's making a very, very good point. Generally putting things that were viewed as effeminate men as being third genders and stuff like that, that was very common through most of civilizations throughout history. And this is going to end up going ahead and feeding into one of our upcoming points, I'm sure, where we're talking about the entire idea of what really counts as being, is something technically its own gender, or is it just a feeling or just a labeled design, and what really counts. So, and then all of it's basically going ahead and continuing in on that. So, I'd say we're pretty much discussing that.
Yeah, one of the big issues I have with the whole non-binary thing, as far as most of the non-binary people that I've encountered, is that their issue doesn't seem to be so much with dysphoria or anything like that. It seems to be an objection to gender roles.
Oh, definitely.
So
that's probably, again, even more than the 70% I mentioned earlier. That's probably bordering along very nearly 100% of non-binaries. Most of.
So would you say that dysphoria plays part
as a general rule? Go ahead and ask your question. Yeah. I can say this part in later. Go ahead, ask your question.
I was just wondering if how you feel about and Saiyomi as well.
Mm-hmm.
How important dysphoria is to being transgender or claiming to be transgender, as many non-binary people do.
Oh well,
can I actually?
Dysphoria is more about the sexual, physical characteristics. It's not necessarily with the gender expression itself, although it does. That usually does play a good role into it. But most of dysphoria is about the physical attributes.
Yeah, the actual desire to have
about, yeah,
the other gender.
About what's masculine on them or feminine on them.
And how about you, Angel?
As far as I would say, I'd go ahead and say the majority of it. Wait, can you guys hear me? Because my thing's not showing me speaking. Okay. I'd say that generally speaking, dysphoria would be, for the vast majority of trans people, would be something that they'd feel, something that they would have experience with. But honestly, for the vast majority of non-binaries, I'd say it's the other way around. The vast majority of them have no idea what dysphoria is like, don't even have an idea of what it's like. And I feel like that's one of the key experiences that keeps the two groups such different demographics to begin with, which is why it frustrates me and has always frustrated me when I would see, and it's always this way, never the other, non-binaries trying to push themselves into the trans community, because the vast majority of them think they have the same experiences.
The opposite.
But just because they think they've got the same experiences, that one thing, just the simple lack of dysphoria, is enough to go ahead and make it so that their experience from a trans person's, even if they've had the same other experiences their entire life, that one thing completely reframes how a trans person would feel it, to the point that no non-binary is gonna who lacks dysphoria is going to be able to understand, and you're going to be hard pressed to find a non-binary who does feel dysphoria to some degree, to some extent, in some way, shape, or form.
So I have to ask then, what separates non-binary people from, say, Wrath or myself, other than this rejection of gender roles? Like, is it condition,
Right.
like trans people suffer from dysphoria, or is it more a
Broadly speaking,
cultural phenomenon, for lack of a better term?
I would say there's very little exceptions or very little differences between non-binaries and cis, for the simple fact that it's more of a difference within how they're perceived in within the culture. While they'll experience some because of how they'll go ahead and express themselves and so forth, as a general thing within mental health and all that, while we can see very clearly that a lot of non-binaries experience a variety of mental health issues, whether it's depression or hormonal imbalances and all sorts of things, we very rarely see, if you were to compare them to a similar cis person, who you wouldn't be able to really tell any difference between them in many cases. I honestly think the fact that there's not a clear line that separates them, aside from how they choose to express themselves, that makes all the difference. And even then, you've got, let's go ahead and use tomboys as an example. Tomboys aren't girls who identify somewhere in the middle. They're girls who just happen to display very similar to men in certain aspects of their cultural appearance, how they choose to go ahead and present themselves. They're not less women just because they choose to dress in more boyish clothing.
Okay, so now I've got to ask,
but you would go
with
ahead
that in mind, you are non-binary. Are you still whichever gender you were born as well?
Biologically male. As far as that's concerned, that's what I generally go with when I choose, let's say, for instance, the bathroom. Because honestly, why would I go ahead and use a different one? It's for biological males who present generally as males and all sorts of stuff. Like, these roles and categories are pretty much based off of the biology, with exceptions for actual trans people. But even then, it's just, sorry, I'm trying to speak without putting my foot in my mouth, because I can very easily do that if I don't think ahead. All right, well, I'll put it this way. I identify as nothing. I don't go ahead and identify actively if I can avoid it. But when I have to identify as something for general sakes of whatever, like, let's say I'm using the restroom, I go based off my sex, because why the hell would I go ahead and use a different restroom when it's for the most broad population?
This one's made for penises. It has
Exactly.
the means
So
of using your penis most efficiently to take a piss, right?
exactly, I go based off of what is most logical and most efficient, and society is built with biological sex in mind, not gender. Actively identify as anything anyways, so why not just go with what society's already had idealized?
Okay, and Saiyomi, now that we're on the transgender bathroom topic, how do you
I don't like using the public restrooms to begin with, but I actually,
Amen to
if
that.
they have a gender neutral one, I'll go to those ones because they're generally cleaner than both the men and the women's, especially the women's. Those bitches are nasty.
You're not wrong. I've worked
But,
for restaurants and had to clean both restrooms, The women's is so much worse, and I don't get it.
Oh no, you're 100% accurate. I think we've all worked somewhere where we had to clean a bathroom at some point, and the women's are
Yeah, it's horrible.
undeniably worse. So I was also
Yeah, that.
What's that?
But yeah, that answers that. So.
I was going to end up just pointing out, until a few years ago, about 2008 to 2010 range, basically around the time that Tumblr started actually having an influence on society, nobody really cared about what bathroom people used. As long as you were quote-unquote respectful, didn't end up going ahead and causing any issues, nobody really cared. I mean, on a stream that I had in my own channel quite a few months ago, I ended up talking with trans woman Madagajinka, and she was talking about how, like, in the 90s, nobody really cared. And honestly, I've noticed that my entire life. It's just been, as long as you go ahead and you're not making a fuss, nobody really cares what you do. But then once my demographic decided we needed to go ahead and be more specialer than everybody else, see, well, Republicans are shutting down access for trans people in certain restrooms. We see Target having to go out of its way to say, yes, it's acceptable for trans people to use the bathroom associated with their gender identity. We then see all this fear-mongering towards trans people flared up from back when it was, from back like what you would have expected in like the 1950s, the 1930s. We see it starting to flare up. Because
yeah, it
my
wasn't
demographic
controversial
pushed
until it was controversial, and then it was a massive issue.
exactly.
My thing is I don't know who shot first, because I feel like we're in kind of a double fault situation where both the religious right and the identitarian left have both perpetuated this problem to where, like, it's almost turning into one of those Middle East situations that no one knows who started it. We're all just mad at each other for fucking no reason. And I'm just sitting in the middle waiting for someone to swing at me so I can knock them the fuck out.
From what I've been able to see, just looking back at, like, remembering, like, chatties I've been in and Tumblr posts I've seen and all of that, it seems like it was my group pushing that had ended up causing, once we ended up getting ourselves associated as trans, once our demographics basically became muddied and mixed, then it ended up being the right took that and ran with it. It was sort of us going ahead and making it so that now they actually had something to use and something to run with.
Yeah, it sort of fueled their fire, so to speak.
So you think the right was kind of like looking for an opportunity, and certain
We gave
people
it to
from
them.
your community gave it to them, basically.
Our existence gave it to them. I mean, look at every single complaint that they have about it, really.
Well, yeah,
So,
I mean,
okay, you have a
90%
guy
of it because Jesus didn't say that was cool in the Bible. I mean, that seems to be the reasoning in my experience, is because Jesus didn't say it's cool in the Bible. Or, well, you know, for Islam and Jews, it's, you know, Judah and Muhammad didn't say it's cool in the Bible and the Quran and the Torah.
Even ignore the pure religious argument. The right really likes to go ahead and say, all right, so you can have a guy who identifies as male 99% of the time, but wants to go ahead and identify as a woman just so they can go ahead and go into the women's restroom. Well, that's an argument made against gender fluidity because of non-binaries having gotten themselves conflated with trans the way that we had. But because people think that it is trans now, well, suddenly they can go ahead and say all trans would be like this. When really they're talking about a subsection of what has become misassociated as trans, and it's not even trans to begin with, so they're making the mistake based off, they're making the claims based off of what someone who isn't even the group they're targeting is doing.
So I think
and even,
you're, yeah. Something along the lines of what I believe. People should be allowed to use they identify with are absolutely actually transgender.
I'm saying actual trainees should be allowed to go ahead and use what the hell they want, and then if somebody's a non-binary, they should go ahead and. When it gets to non-binaries, I've got a lot of issues with how to say that. Generally speaking, I think non-binary should just go based off their sex.
See,
I have some exceptions, I'd say, but
right
as a general rule.
My thought with non-binaries, and granted, I might be speaking from a place of privilege because I'm a cis white male, but here goes anyway.
Fuck privilege.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for that. Not that I would have really cared because I'm a dick, but my thing is, with transgenders, if you're in or going through the actual like physical, psychological, and or medical process of it, go with the gender you're transitioning to. And with non-binary, I'm gonna set an honor system and say go with what you pass as.
Acceptable.
The super androgynous, it's like pick a fucking side. Like pick a side, declare it on your driver's license, and just play along for the paperwork, and you can call yourself whatever the fucking hell you want. I don't care. But for the paperwork's sake, and for the sake of not having us change the entire goddamn system for less than 1% of the population, pick a side. That's what you are. If you want to change it, you can change it when you update your driver's license, or you can request a new license and change it then. Like, I'm not trying to be completely insensitive to non-binaries, but at the same time, I don't think the system should have to accommodate less than 1% on a comfort thing.
Hold on, I am going to end up wanting to say this one thing. And this was just because I saw you going ahead and trying to disclaimer yourself and all that. Just assume that I'm like your standard anti-feminist, anti-social justice warrior, because I'm not that far off.
Fair enough. I don't assume
any of my content.
I didn't get a chance to research your content. I've been in a whirlwind of shit. Schmeckel messaged me last night and said, "Hey, bro, want to come on and do this?" And it's kind of like, hell yeah, sure. I'll talk to fucking anybody.
Kind of lazy about getting
just assume I'm like.
I've watched your shit. Wrath hasn't.
Yeah.
All right. Just assume that. Act like you would if you were talking to any of the other anti-SJWs.
Okay, Blair. But yeah, I don't know.
Right, so we'll probably go for maybe a little bit longer. I did promise Wrath we wouldn't be too long because
I didn't sleep
last night. I did have a couple more questions though. I was wondering a little bit about you've kind of covered this with the whole 70% are attention seekers and all that. Tumblr does Angel Gray and Saiyomi.
Exacerbates.
For and against and trans people.
As far as I say, it exacerbates everything. That's pretty much all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I would say so too. At least for the majority of Tumblr. They do a lot of changing the definitions of things and too to fit whatever they want.
Okay, so you both kind of agree that we're not exactly doing anything good for trans rights or any of that stuff.
No.
I'll put it this way. Tumblr may be well-intentioned at times and only at times, but it doesn't matter what their intentions are. It's in the end, it's going to end up all being self-serving anyways because they think it'll look good for them anyhow. So fuck what Tumblr wants. It's not helping anybody in the long run.
And we'll make this one of the last points. hoping that I could get your opinions on the absolute opposite side of the argument. So I guess that would be people who flat out say non-binary, and for you, Saiyomi, probably just what's the best way that you could refute the people that like, an abnormality or who believe that your existence is wrong.
So my existence is wrong. So what kind of people are we talking about? Like, I guess the right or
We're
turfs or
talking
whatever.
turfs, definitely. The far right, like the heavily Christian anti-trans groups.
Mm-hmm. Oh well, gender dysphoria is not. You can Google it. It's not hard to look up. That's what my thing is. It's like, the information's there, so I don't know what they're bitching about.
I lean the same way I do. The science is there, so
Yeah.
the science comes
So
above
quit bitching because your feelings.
the feeling.
Then let's not
Because
forget
you
that
want to feel some sort of way.
Let's
And a
not
lot
forget
of the
that
times it is they have some sort of feelings about it because something happened to them or something, or jealousy. That's a big thing. Or they're just paranoid, or usually it's just trying to make a boogeyman out of something.
Yeah, it's looking for an enemy for the sake of enemy.
Mm-hmm. It's just taking everything and taking it way out of proportion.
Angel, how would you feel about the people that say non-binary just...
as far as the people who say non-binary just flat out doesn't exist, well, I'm going to go ahead and end up pointing to the same resources that non-binaries generally point to. There's various studies that go ahead and show abnormalities and anomalies within brain and so forth as far as gender and how that's all connected. The problem is non-binaries generally turn around and say, this goes ahead and confirms non-binary or confirms that gender is a spectrum. My general point that I used when I point out that evidence is this goes ahead and shows that what we understood as fact might not possibly be true. And instead of stating definitively there are 2 genders or stating definitively there are 97 genders, just go ahead and say this is what I believe, and I am willing to wait for more evidence to come out, because otherwise, if the evidence comes out and you're standing there saying definitively there are in fact this many genders, well, you're going to look like a fool if it turns out that you're wrong. Even if tradition says there are exactly 2, that doesn't mean that it's going to end up being exactly correct once the science actually has gotten to a point where we can better test for this. And if you're standing there saying there's 97 genders, well,
You're going to look a lot more foolish than the guy who was
than the guy who's going based off tradition.
See, I know. My kind of stance on it is like the 97, 76 arguments. They say it in very ways, like they have data that they just too good for us to produce for us, per se. Us being those who refute them. And it just is really condescending. That's why a lot of us are somewhat aggressive about how we approach those kind of arguments, is that it's like, no, there are 97 genders. And it's kind of like evidence that you've provided for that number. So I think that's why I think sometimes certain aspects of your community, so to speak,
demographic, I don't identify actively with them. I would not call it a community any more than I'd call YouTube a community.
yeah, your demographic, of like how your demographic, like inspiration on why your demographic is because the mentality and attitude about that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, the non-binary demographic, non-binaries in general tend to be really, really stupid and nonsensical when it comes to trying to say how many genders there are. As far as I
Yeah,
see,
they always tend to go for the highest number they can find.
if you're going to end up saying that there's anything more than 2, at best you can make an argument for 5. And even then, that's probably pushing it
Yeah, you're talking about like
if we're going to end up looking at it.
stuff, right?
I'll put it
Like the
this way,
whole
because I was planning on
XXY and all
talking
that.
about this during this anyways, if you'd let me. So if you go ahead
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
if you look at all the genders, all the Tumblr genders, and all that are out there, they all fall into one of 5 categories. You have the traditional male, traditional female, androgynous, or more loosely somewhere in between. Then you've got agender, which, as I said earlier, barely counts as a gender anyways. And then you have cultural third genders, such as Two-Spirit and Hydra, as were mentioned earlier. So everything else really falls under one of these 5 categories. It's either some variation or permutation on male, some variation or permutation on female, and so forth. You can almost always go ahead and say, all right, well, this gender really is just it's a specification of this group. Really, all it is, just as I said earlier, tomboys aren't just another gender, they're not some other form of girl, they're just a more specific group of girls. And
Yeah, they're masculine girls. Just like half of
the other genders are like that, falling into one of these 5.
exactly.
Or
I
just
get what you're
freely
saying.
expressing how
Everything
they
on
want
the
to.
what's that?
Or just freely expressing how they want to.
And
They don't
exactly.
hold themselves to just
Then you
feminine or
still kind of
masculine.
fall into one of these.
They don't hold
that
themselves
people-
to a box.
And even then, their gender would still fall under one of those 5. Even if they don't want to go ahead and, even if they don't actively put themselves in one, okay, then that means that they sort of get, quote unquote, defaulted into a gender. Not quite, but it's the closest thing that I can say towards that, and that makes it so easy to go ahead and debunk what most of them go ahead and end up saying.
Yeah, the fact that they'll make all these claims about gender while categorizing themselves into categories that really any different from the category directly to the left or the category directly to the right, and which really aren't all that different from the 2 at the extreme ends.
Yeah, a lot of them also, they'll say they're non-binary, but then they'll have like, oh, by the way, I'm like 25 other genders too. And I'm like, I thought non-binary was about not putting yourself into little categories and stuff, just expressing freely.
No, actually, that was just one of the lies that was being said for propaganda purposes through Tumblr.
Well,
Surprise how
Tumblr
much
is a very
the modern
Non-binary.
most of the understanding that people have of non-binary comes from there, and that's the scary part.
Well,
It's
yeah,
also part of the reason
Tumblr
why
has become a very scary concept. If you look at and how many of the young kids are on there every day, all day.
I mean, these are some of the same things that I was saying back during the days where Tumblr really actually had a lot more influence than it does now. Back when people were actually getting trolled into believing, and I'm talking trolled into believing, that they were cat gender or dog gender. I'm not even joking. Those 2 specifically originated as a result of trolling through some online game that then got pushed into Tumblr and ended up getting accepted there as being legitimate. And it's just like,
It's fortunate that nowadays, of us, even the majority of people in everyday society, see Tumblr as
a joke.
a joke. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Tumblr no longer has the ad. It's
Hold-
regarded
credibility
kind of as
is
what it
zero.
is now.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, say Tumblr is, it's not quite Gawker bad, but it's not taken seriously by most people that I've encountered. Like, I have friends who resent the fact that Tumblr is the easiest way to get their art out because DeviantArt's kind of died.
Well, on the upside, let's just be thankful that Tumblr is probably going to end up dying off eventually.
Oh yeah,
Hopefully.
I think Twitter won't be far behind it. To be frank,
Twitter's committing suicide right now. I'm surprised
Oh,
that
yeah.
Twitter's pretty bad. I think Facebook's going to go down first before Twitter, though.
I'm going to have to disagree.
I think they might kind of fall together.
Yeah, they're not too far off from each other.
Like,
yeah.
I'm not sure who's going to go down first, per se, but I don't think there'd even be a year between one falling
depends on
into
if someone
MySpace-dom and then
Yeah.
the other. Like, it'll
Okay,
get sold
can we
to some
talk-
company and then become obsolete.
Another company just needs to build up the infrastructure is all.
Can we talk about how scary it is that Reddit might actually end up being the new Facebook in terms of popularity? Like, actually legitimately overtaking Facebook as a network?
That does kind of weird me out.
But only because the slope it represents.
Mm-hmm.
It eventually 4chan will be the new Facebook. And
No,
that'll
thank
be
God I
pretty
don't believe that's going to
I think
happen.
4chan's already had its time as a major network. I think it's
4chan died 10 years ago.
yeah.
It just
4chan has already gone the way of MySpace, in my opinion.
On the upside, at least 4chaners still can do some good, like how they ended up messing with Shia LaBeouf. Let's face it.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they do still provide some entertainment. So we're gonna bring this to a close so I can let my old co-host here go to bed.
Oh,
So
actually,
let's get a quick shill from each of you. We'll start with Angel.
Michael, just real quick, because I technically haven't done the done what I came on here to do. Is it all right if I go ahead
That's
and
true.
say exactly how people can refute non-binary? The easiest way to refute non-binary is doing what I just did a few minutes ago. It's all about condensing. After you've gone ahead and pulled everything down into those 5 categories, a gender doesn't really constitute as a gender of its own, and people honestly should just go ahead and default with when it comes to that towards what their biological sex is. So that's already one of the 5 off the table. Cultural third genders generally fall under a variation on male or female anyways, and in the rare cases they don't end up falling under androgynous. So that's already a way of simplifying that down to 3 genders: male, female, and androgynous. Then when you look at the vast majority of androgens, you go ahead and end up seeing that they almost always fall into more male or more female. And as a result, they're not really quote unquote truly androgynous because you can tell that they fall in one of the two. In the off chance that they actually are somewhere down the middle, at that point you're looking at such a small percentage of the population. But if you were to find one, then as far as that person is concerned, it would really be a matter of what they would rather fall under. Probably looking again at biological sex more likely than not. It's just a matter of condensing, and it's really the easiest argument you can use, because if a non-binary wants to say, well, that doesn't work because X reason, Y reason, or Z reason, well, all you got to do is ask why not and refute that little whatever their argument is to that, and that's a lot easier to do than trying to figure out how to refute why gender or attack helicopter is a gender. And let's face it, it's not that hard to go ahead and refute what non-binaries come up with because they usually don't think ahead. And yes, I do see the irony of someone in that demographic basically calling the non-binary demographic dumb.
To be fair, you're not wrong. So
And this
there
is the
might be
reason why
irony
I've been
in it,
pretty
dude.
much excommunicated.
Hey, maybe one day you'll be the non-binary Blair White.
Well,
Entire fucking community.
too late. I kind of crossed that bridge back in the early 20-teens. Late 2000s, but still.
All right, so we're gonna draw this to an end now. Angel, quick chill. Tell everybody where people can find you.
You can find me on on YouTube at Angel Gray, or you can find me on Twitter at Angel Gray Tweets. As far as I care, you can go ahead and follow or subscribe, but it's not like you're going to end up getting anything too interesting. I only post videos on YouTube like once every 3 months. And as far as Twitter goes, you're more likely or not just going to find me getting into a argument with somebody. Although that can come out pretty entertaining. So,
Oh yeah, they're always.
I don't know.
All right, and
So I
Saiyomi.
guess that's it for me.
You can find me on Twitter as just Saiyomi, Saiyoomi, and then the same for my YouTube.
All right, and Wrath. Everybody here fucking knows you already, but
I think he
and
already
Wrath's
left.
not here. All right.
I had my manual switch off because I have an inline switch on my headset. Sorry about that. I am the internet's second favorite sin. So once you're done fapping to Saiyomi, you can come check me out on YouTube, Wrath of Controversy, or on Twitter, Wrath_O_con, because I like making people type underscores for reasons.
And I don't need to say shit. You're already on my channel. Like and subscribe, cunts. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.